John was enjoying a welcome mid-morning break when he was the victim of a vicious street crime. It cost him several £1,000s, but it wasn't until the next day he realised the enormity of it. All he can recall is responding to a text from what he thought was his bank, urgently asking him to verify his security details. Moments later, he'd been robbed in broad daylight.
You can't see cybercrime, but there are ways to avoid it. At Barclays, we'll never ask you to verify your security details by text.
No substitutes. This is Talk Radio.
The Independent Republic of Mike Graham on Talk Radio.
And it's time to say a very good morning to Mr. Peter Hitchens. Peter, how are you?
Morning.
So, are you feeling free? Are you feeling as if the gloom has been lifted from your shoulders?
No.
I sort of expected that answer, to be honest. What's different?
A little bit is different. A few more people on the trains at the railway stations this morning not wearing masks. But I haven't tested it out fully to see how it is. I haven't been to any shops lately, for instance. So I don't know. I think there'll probably be a larger number of people who will not do that, but it's still a very, 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 very large number who will continue to wear masks, it seems to me. And my view of them is that one has to be sympathetic to them, and they still believe that they're in danger. So we have to, as I've always said, it's like having members of a religion I don't agree with. I mean, I have to treat their beliefs with respect, even if I don't follow them myself. But I still think they have far too much power over the rest of us.
Well, that's the trouble, isn't it? My interest is in getting information today from people out and about as to what the shops are doing, what people are being told when they get onto public transport, because at the moment it seems...
I can tell you that.
Go on.
Instead of the usual lecture about how it's a legal obligation, there's now an even longer lecture about how they would really like us to do it, please. A great deal of effort is being, that you cannot go on a train journey these days without being subjected to some constant hospital radio broadcast.
Yeah.
Sometimes lasting 4 or 5 minutes from start to finish. Well, along with the see it, say it, sordid stuff about the British Transport Police, is a long, long thing appealing to us all to carry on wearing masks.
Yeah.
Which has almost the same effect. Looking around, there were, I think, probably in the carriage that I was in, a couple more people not wearing masks who I think normally would have been, but in general, it's still, and of course, all the staff are doing so, and all the staff at the station were doing so. I would imagine they're under considerable pressure from their employers to do that too. You can't tell whether it's voluntary or not.
No, I mean, I've seen a couple of emails now. One from my son's bus company, Stagecoach, which he takes the bus to go to college, saying, and this same phrase appears in both emails. The other one from Tesco's that we've just been talking to a caller about. Please continue to wear a mask, and this is the key phrase: if you can. And that seems to be the new mantra. Now, I don't know what that means particularly. If you can, well, I could or I can, but I may not.
There's been a very deep misunderstanding in lots of places about the nature of exemptions, and I think that continues to persist. But there's no point in trying to explain it to people. It is, I suppose, probably slightly easier now not to wear a mask than it was before. It probably still takes a bit of nerve for a lot of people. But there you are. I just wish more people would pay attention to the evidence. You may have noticed that last week I somehow got Nick Robinson of the BBC to reverse his position on masks. I mean, hectoring and saying they were assuming that they were effective, actually stating quite publicly in an interview that the loose cloth masks which everybody wears are no use, which I think is actually beyond dispute. I think any serious person, even on the mask side, imagines that those things can do any good. I mean, they're great flapping holes on the side of them, even if people don't wear them around their chins. How this strange thing, I keep seeing young women, I think, how on earth is that woman, is she wearing a false beard? Because they've got them around their chins in the way that people have those chin strap beards. And it's really, really peculiar. Of course she hasn't got a beard, but the way in which people wear them, half down or entirely down, is also fascinating. But and pull them out of their pockets and then put them back in their pockets.
Yes.
Anybody who knows anything about hospital mask wearing and the N95 mask knows you mustn't touch them.
Right.
As soon as you take them off, they have to be replaced by another one. They can't. They have to be tightly fitted to the face, quite uncomfortably. A totally different thing from So I don't want to encourage the authorities to demand that we all wear N95 masks. Apart from anything else, it would bankrupt the country because they cost about £5 a year.
Yeah, right.
But it is a simple point which one cannot help. Even people who understand this must know that these tokens which people are wearing can't really do much good, especially against aerosols.
No, and there really is very little in the way now of anyone who will say that they do. It's now, as we said last week, I think it's now become a different reason. It's now become, well, you've got to try and consider other people, and that's why you should wear it.
Well, sure, but there's this curious thing. I mean, can virus aerosols only travel one way through a piece of cloth? If and we know that there's no proof that it protects us from infection. If they can't get in, if they can get in through the mask, then why shouldn't they be able to get out? But no, there are plenty of people, including, I think there's a leading academic called Trish Greenhouse, who continues to believe very strongly in masks and to put that position forward and get a lot of airtime for that position too. So it's not gone away. None of this has gone away. What worries me far more is how much it's going to come back. I suspect that quite a lot of the zero COVID people and the rest of the militants who want to have us pretty much permanently under control for health reasons are waiting for their opportunity to say, oh, look, you relaxed on July the 19th. Look what happened. Look at these huge figures for so-called infections, which are, of course, obtained by having huge numbers of tests looking for them and don't indicate necessarily any actual illness among those. And then they point to hospital admissions. Well, hospital admissions, again, what do these figures mean? The last time I tried to look at hospital admissions connected with COVID, what I found was that the people were in hospital, they'd been tested positive for COVID, but you couldn't state simply that's why they were in hospital, and they'd been in hospital with something completely different. Yes. As with deaths with COVID, are they deaths from COVID, or are they people who died who got COVID? And one thing we do know for sure, if you wanted to get COVID, the place to go would be a hospital where the
precisely.
It's astonishing. So it's not particularly surprising that people die in hospital with COVID, but have they died? But nobody examines these statistics in a particularly rational or forensic fashion, because there's this huge desire, both among the lobby, the zero COVID lobby, and the people who want us permanently under control, and among many frightened people, never ever to go back to the way we lived before. And we have to recognise this. This is not a liberty-loving country anymore.
No. And for some unfortunate people, and one of them, Ashton, has sent me a message today, a tweet, in which he says that his company have sent him an email suggesting that while it's great news that the lockdown has been lifted, they will be testing even more now that employees come into the office. They'll be testing them 3 times a week. Now, some people don't care about being tested. I refuse to be tested. I've never been tested. I won't take a test just because somebody wants me to. And I certainly won't take a test. There's nothing wrong with me.
No, but I'd say there is the fear has gone in so deep, and fear is irrational. It's completely immune to reason. Has anyone ever tried to reason with a large group of people, perhaps on a demonstration or something like that, and suggest that some of the things that they're saying won't actually withstand serious examination? Very rapidly, the response turns to anger. People don't listen because they're safer in their certainty and fear than they would be in a reasoning world, and that's what we've come to. And the damage done to reason in politics and public life and broadcasting and universities and everywhere else by this is considered. They were already quite badly damaged. I think we've been turning away from reason and the proper scientific method in this country for a long while. But these past 18 months have been a major turn back towards what looks to me very like superstition.
Well, it's interesting. I used that very word this morning when I was talking to people, talking about the numbers of people who are out there wearing masks. It is almost like a superstition that they're suffering from.
Well, but before people knew things about diseases, they did have what were more or less superstitions, but were respected in a way as solutions. I mean, in my hometown of Oxford, there is a stream called the Trill Mill Stream. It was a filthy open sewer in the 19th century. And it's a great cholera outbreak before it was discovered for certain by John Snow that cholera was actually linked to dirty water.
Yeah.
The belief was that cholera was spread by what's called miasma, a sort of invisible cloud of infection, which came out of such places. So that the governing body of Christchurch, one of the great colleges of Oxford, and full of very, very highly qualified academic persons, voted to build quite high walls on either side of this stream, which are still there, I have to say, to keep the cholera in. That was the level, and we seem to have reverted to this sort of view of disease as an impenetrable miasma, which can be kept out by physical objects, which I don't think in most cases is really true.
No, and it's certainly not provably true, and that's for sure. Even though people like Sadiq Khan continually say, well, of course there is great evidence to show that masks will stop the spread of the disease. Well, there isn't. Actually, there isn't.
Well, he's never challenged to say what it is. I mean, look, of course there are hazmat suits and tight-fitting masks, particularly ones which cover the eyes, the sort of things which you would use in, say, an Ebola outbreak, which do indeed get in the way of infection. But I think it's impracticable to ask the mass of population to wear things of this kind, and that's the difference. Obviously, there are really, really strong precautions which can be taken, but these are so costly and difficult and very, very hard for most people to wear properly and to follow the instructions. That's not a practicality. But the whole mask thing, I think Graham Brady wrote an article in the Mail on Sunday yesterday saying that it was much more of a political symbol than an actual protection. And I think that remains the case. People wear them as a sign of compliance with the new regime. Yeah,
which is rather sad. You also wrote in your column this week, Peter, about the police, and Cressida Dick in particular. She's obviously asking now for an extension to her, what can only be described as troubled tenure, because I'm struggling to think of anything that she's actually got right while she's been in charge of the Metropolitan Police.
No, it's extraordinary, isn't it, the way she persists. But I remember reading an article about her, actually by an old friend of mine, David Rose, in the Observer newspaper many years ago, describing her.
When the Observer was still a good paper.
Well, yeah, I think the point was that what they were saying was this was a person who made bargains with demonstrators rather than and was in general the sort of police officer who liberals love. And she'd obviously, it seemed to me, been picked from a very early age that as someone who might well make the first female Metropolitan Commissioner. And I pretty much predicted it at the time. And I've watched her rise and rise and rise. The fascinating thing people often don't realise is she'd actually left the Metropolitan Police and gone to work for the Foreign Office before she was picked for this job. She'd actually ceased to be a police officer and then came back to do it. It's a forgotten part. I don't. It's quite clear that what she symbolises. I mean, I have actually had some communication with her. She's a perfectly nice person. I didn't want to make it personal. What she symbolises is a new form of policing, the sort of policing which says that all crime and disorder is actually caused by social problems. That the job of the police is to be as paramilitary social workers. There is no more any right and wrong. The police aren't there to scare wrongdoers into behaving, which is actually the very simple description of what they used to be for. They're there for a completely different reason, and they're much, much more political. And their upper ranks, really since the 1980s, have been increasingly filled with people who can be described as strongly politically correct. And since the Macpherson report, that accelerated. And then, of course, the recruitment of constables, the people who we actually encounter, has also changed. They're very different sorts of people from the sort that you and I will remember. From the police. So it is a wholly different organisation with a wholly different purpose. And whatever it is any good for, I'll tell you what it isn't any good for. It's not any good for preventing or investigating actual crime. And it's not really very much good at policing against disorder at football matches. I've been saying this now. I remember when I first tentatively began to say it, getting into some trouble with my readers, more than 20 years ago. And I wrote a book about it in 2003, explaining how it had happened and where it had all gone wrong. I can't get any purchase on this. I say it over and over and over again, but whenever even apparently quite intelligent, literate politicians, but the moment they start talking about the police, they start saying, we need to have more bobbies on the beat. They always say it.
Right.
And by saying those words, they reveal that they know nothing whatever about the police. There hasn't been any such thing as a bobby for something in the region of 30 years. Right. There hasn't been anything such as a beat for about the same length of time. So putting more bobbies on the beat is a bit like putting more aliens on Jupiter. It just isn't simply something within their power. And yet they keep saying it because they don't understand what's happened. Yes. And they can't be bothered to find out. And that is just the nature of so much politics. When I keep writing these books, because I don't really know. I know vaguely what's happened, but I don't know in detail. Let's find out. And I go into the archives and I look it up. It's not all that hard to find. I suddenly find myself in possession of not very difficult to find, not very complicated knowledge. And I look at the speeches and remarks of politicians. I find they don't know any of this. And it's distressing.
Yes.
To me.
No, it's very distressing.
I keep on saying it. It's not hard to find out what's happened.
No.
If you don't want this sort of police force, it would be very easy to put it right, but nobody does.
No, quite. Stay with us, Peter. We're going to stop for a moment. Peter Hitchens is here with us, Man on Sunday columnist. We're talking about the police. I've got some more things to say about Cressida Dick and why the police force in London, certainly, and possibly in the rest of the country, is not fit for purpose, rather like so many of our actual public sector businesses. They're just not very good. This is Talk Radio. Planet Republican Mike Graham right here on Talk Radio. We're talking to Peter Hitchens about a great many things, including, of course, the conduct of the police in this country at the moment, because one of the things that they were pretty much incapable of coping with, it would seem, Peter, was the Wembley farce at the final of the Euros, but not just the Wembley farce, the farce of what was going on in central London, which more or less got taken over by sort of a rampaging mob of drunk people.
Well, yeah, so they've showed this before. In the supposed riots some years ago in the capital, which were actually just an outbreak of disorder and looting, it took an amazing length of time to recognise what was going on and respond to it, and to pick up a few stragglers and bring them to court, rather than the people who were at the forefront of the looting and troublemaking, I think, got away almost entirely scot-free. It's because they don't actually have anymore the purpose which they were set up for. They say they have this social work purpose, which involves all kinds of decisions about who should or should not be deployed. Another thing which is going on, I think, in a lot of public services at the moment, which may have affected the response to the football match, is the huge numbers of people self-isolating.
Yeah.
Which is a major problem, I think, in all public services. I'm sure we're going to find shops closing and trains cancelled in increasing numbers because of this.
Yes.
And you say, well, given that the government could, by some small tweak, reduce the numbers of people being pinged, you have to ask, why don't they do that? And one has to suspect that the answer is that there are people within government who quite want to reintroduce a lockdown by the back door, which is effectively what this pingdemic is causing. So that may have something to do with it. It also causes problems for the National Health Service, which has very large numbers of staff isolating all the time, as well as the beds being much further distant from each other, which reduces its ability to respond to anything.
But this is the thing.
All things are enormously complicated. As well as the police just having the wrong idea of what it is they're for, they do also face this problem, and we have to be aware of it.
Yeah.
And the thing we discovered yesterday, which we didn't discover, we were informed of it, because we had already been told by Mike Hancock in detail, and by Dominic Cummings earlier, is that people who devise these policies don't believe their own propaganda.
No.
They don't, when it comes to it, behave the way they tell us to behave.
And all of the problems in the NHS, I was listening perhaps to the same interview you were listening to yesterday. There was a guy from something like NHS Support or something, one of those kind of ancillary NHS bodies, talking about how the reason why hospitals were having problems and struggling was, one, as you say, because they were spacing out the beds, two, lots of people were off because they were self-isolating, and three, they built up a huge backlog of cases which were not involving COVID because they hadn't treated anybody. And all of that is the fault of the NHS and the way the NHS is managed. None of that has got anything to do with the way COVID actually affected them.
Well, no, it has a lot to do with the way that the government reaction to COVID.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right, so the NHS, as we know, is full of good, competent, hard-working, courageous people. But it's not.
It's also full of complete, utterly useless managers.
Very poor organisation. Which
is
a different thing altogether. But under these pressures, any organisation would struggle when you, at a moment of difficulty, huge numbers of your staff are unable to work because they've been sent home. And when your bed capacity, which has already been reduced by Labour and Conservative governments, I should say, far below where it used to be, is even more greatly reduced by this extra spacing, then you're going to struggle. And rather than banging pots and pans and saying how wonderful it is, much more sense if people offered constructive criticism of how it was being run and got politicians to pay some attention to it.
Right.
And the more you praise something, the less it's criticised and the less it will improve.
But the problem as well for me with the police and many of our public sector sort of leaders, if you like, is that they appear to have learned all of what they know about the business they're in, sort of in a lecture theatre rather than actually doing a job in the business, you know. And so with Cressida Dick, her sort of version of how to be a police officer is what she learned when she was in university rather than, you know, walking around.
Well, sure. I think she did a thesis on the miners' strike.
Great.
I think you can. I think she can reply with though that she did do the basic stuff at the beginning. She has been through the ranks. Again, it's not that the problem is not so much what she did as what she thinks, and what she thinks. So this has been the problem since Roy Jenkins revolutionised policing practically in the 1960s. What he did was he turned the police from a preventive force, which is what it had always been before. It was quite expensive, particularly in the new towns and the big new housing estates, to patrol. And they had at that point a recruitment crisis. So Jenkins responded to this by saying, well, actually what we should do instead is react, put policemen in cars, let people ring them up when they needed them. But of course, if you do that, if you wait for crime to happen, then you've completely abandoned your main purpose. The simple point: you cannot unburgle someone who has been burgled. You cannot unmug someone who has been mugged. You cannot unattack someone who's been attacked. The whole point about the police was they had big visible stations in the middle of towns, which everybody could see, out of which came foot patrolling constables who were there on the streets and could appear at any moment and made people think, well, maybe if I do this, I'll get caught. And all that vanished. And then along came the political revolution in the police, in which they decided that they were not really interested in prosecuting or pursuing crime. And they always say, we haven't got the numbers. I mean, I've been through this so many times. I went into the numbers, and they've actually got more numbers, both per head of population and absolutely, than they ever had in the days when they used to do the job properly. But it's what they always say. And when I began saying this, I have to say, I used to get a lot of stick from members of the public who say you can't attack the police, they're nice, and that's pretty much gone, because most people's encounter with the police is disappointing.
Yes, nice, not what I'd be using.
Got the police coming out and saying, well, we haven't got the staff. And I wrote and said, no, that's a bit by bit by bit, after nearly 20 years of saying this, I now find, as with so many other things that I said 20 years ago, other people joining in. Well, look, learn from this, guys. I was right then. It was 20 years ago. I was right. If you listened to me then, we could have fixed it by now. And here are some other things I'm right about we could fix. Can you just pay attention a bit more?
Yes. I mean, it's not much to ask, Peter. For heaven's sake. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, Mail on Sunday columnist, once again giving us the benefit of